So imagine you're staring at a stock chart, right? Like right before a massive crash.
Oh, yeah. Those are always stressful to look at.
Right. And the line is still, hovering near the top of the graph, and everything looks technically fine on the surface. But underneath, the trading volume is totally erratic. The indicators are flashing red, and the underlying math is just screaming that a collapse is imminent.
Yeah, it's that precise moment of like peak anxiety where the fundamentals just simply do not support the current valuation.
Exactly.
And you're just sitting there waiting for the floor to drop out.
Well, today we are unpacking a snapshot of that exact kind of high-stakes, chaotic math in this deep dive. Only we aren't looking at Wall Street today.
No, definitely not Wall Street.
We're actually looking at a really fascinating piece of sports analytics via a YouTube preview for AFT Dice Season 13.
Which is such an amazing rabbit hole if you haven't been down it.
Oh, it completely is. For those of you listening who haven't encountered this, we are talking about a highly complex dice simulation of Australian rules football. And our mission today is to decode what they're calling the Round 9 Tactical Gauntlet. We want to figure out which of these simulated AFL teams actually have true structural integrity and whose seasons are built like, fragile Jenga towers.
Which is such a brilliant exercise in data analysis, really. Because what we're looking at here isn't just a game, it's a masterclass in statistics, variance, and dealing with the pressure of razor-thin margins.
Yeah, the source material specifically calls out round 9 for a reason. Right?
Exactly. Round 9 in this simulation is the ultimate sorting ground for the finals. It's the exact point in the data set where the early season illusions are violently stripped away and the actual mathematical foundations of these teams are finally exposed.
Okay, so to understand the sheer chaos happening in the middle of this ladder, I think we have to start by looking at the traffic jam at the very top.
It is quite the traffic jam.
It really is. We have this three-headed monster sitting at the summit. So Hawthorn, Port Adelaide, and Brisbane are all in a three-way tie for first place. They're all sitting on exactly 24 premiership points. And, since you get 4 points for a win, that means each of these teams has secured exactly 6 victories.
But what stands out immediately there is how 3 completely different statistical profiles have arrived at that exact same destination.
Right.
That 24-point mark is masking wildly different narratives about how these teams are actually performing under the hood of the simulation's engine.
Let's actually break down the heads of this monster because it's fascinating. First, you have Hawthorn. They currently hold the percentage lead, and percentage is basically the main tiebreaker in the standings based on points scored versus points conceded.
Yeah, crucial.
And Hawthorn is riding this massive wave of momentum. They're boasting a 4-game win streak as they head into a clash against Essendon at Marvel Stadium. They look like the genuine article.
They really do.
But then you look right next to them at Port Adelaide. Now, Port Adelaide started this simulation with a perfect 6-0 record. They looked completely untouchable. But suddenly, they've dropped 2 games in a row, and their upcoming trip to face Gold Coast is being labeled by the source as a must-win.
And that label is mathematically accurate, I'd say. In a high-variance environment like a dice simulation, momentum is often just, a localized cluster of probability.
Okay, a localized cluster. I like that.
Yeah. So Hawthorn's current 4-game streak suggests their underlying formula is clicking right now, right? They're playing to their statistical strengths. But Port Adelaide's sudden instability suggests something entirely different.
Like what?
It suggests that their initial 6-0 run might not have actually been built on a sustainable foundation.
See, I'm kind of struggling to make the math work on that theory because I look at it like a marathon runner, right?
Okay.
If a runner sprints the first 6 miles at world record pace and then they suddenly hit the wall at mile 7, you don't look at those first 6 miles and say they were an accident. You just say the runner burned out.
Right, that makes sense intuitively.
Yeah. But the source asks if Port Adelaide's dominance was just a statistical fluke. Is it really possible to win 6 games in a row purely by mathematical luck? Like, can a team just roll the equivalent of sixes in a row and have it mean absolutely nothing about their actual quality?
It's a great question, and it really raises an important point about how human beings perceive patterns versus how probability actually operates.
We like to find meaning in everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're wired to see a 6-0 start and automatically assume dominance. We assume there's a permanent structural advantage at play. But in a simulation governed by dice rolls and probability matrices, a 6-0 start can absolutely be a statistical fluke.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, I mean, if you run 1,000 simulations, there will always be instances where a fundamentally mediocre team gets a clustering of favorable rolls. They win the coin tosses, they get the edge in the close contests, and their defensive modifiers happen to align perfectly with the opponent's bad rolls.
So they just got incredibly lucky over a sustained period.
Right, but the law of large numbers always comes to collect its due.
Meaning regression to the mean is basically kicking down Port Adelaide's door right now.
Precisely.
The early favorable rolls are vanishing, and their true baseline is showing.
Yes. The simulation is finding them out over a larger sample size of games. That's why this Gold Coast matchup is a true test of their structural integrity. It's not just about ladder position. It's a test of whether their algorithm has completely collapsed.
Oh, I see.
If they lose 3 in a row after winning 6, the data heavily implies the 6-0 run was the anomaly. Contrast that with Hawthorn, who weathered the early season variance, took a couple of early losses, and are now stacking wins organically.
Right, so Hawthorn's momentum feels earned by a solid tactical profile rather than just being gifted by the dice.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have Hawthorn surfing the math and Port Adelaide potentially drowning in it. But here is where the data gets incredibly bizarre.
Oh, yeah.
There is a third team tied at the top with 24 points, Brisbane. And based on everything we just talked about regarding sustainable metrics, Brisbane shouldn't logically be there.
They are the great anomaly of Season 13, without a doubt.
They're in third place, defying the odds, because they have a winning record despite having a negative percentage.
Right.
The source explicitly calls their upcoming matchup the glass jaw test. They're facing a high-octane North Melbourne side who are sitting in 7th place at the Gabba, and this matchup is being billed as a tactical war between efficiency and pure volume.
Yeah, it's a fascinating clash of styles.
But wait, how on earth does a team tie for first place with a negative percentage? If percentage measures points scored versus points conceded, a negative percentage means they've literally given up more total points across the season than they've scored.
Right. Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of how sports ladders function, percentage is your most honest indicator of overall team strength.
Okay.
To be tied for first place in the premiership standings while sitting in the red on percentage, it means a team is breaking the fundamental laws of sustainable winning.
So they're winning the games that count, but the math says they're actually getting beaten up on aggregate.
Yes, that is the only mathematical way to achieve this profile. You do it by winning close and losing big.
Oh.
When Brisbane wins, they're just squeaking by. They're edging out an opponent by 2 or 3 points. In the simulation, this implies their profile is hyper-efficient in tight, low-scoring moments.
Right. They do exactly enough to secure the 4 premiership points for a win.
Exactly. But when their dice rolls fail and they lose, they are getting completely blown off the park in, like, a 50-point demolition.
Wow.
So their overall points differential plummets into the negative, even though their win-loss column looks elite.
That actually explains the glass jaw metaphor beautifully.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. A fighter with a glass jaw can win a lot of bouts if they're elusive and efficient, scoring quick technical points and dodging the heavy hits. But the second they get tagged by a clean, heavy shot, they're out cold on the canvas.
Which brings us perfectly to why North Melbourne is the ultimate nightmare matchup for Brisbane right now.
Because of the volume.
Yes. North Melbourne represents pure volume. They're a high-octane team, desperate to climb back into the top 4. And in AFL terms, volume means generating a massive number of inside 50s.
And for those listening who aren't familiar with the sport, an inside 50 is essentially successfully driving the ball deep into your attacking zone, the 50-meter arc around the goal.
Right.
So the more times you enter that zone, the more scoring shots you generate.
Exactly. So if you're generating heavy volume, you're essentially forcing the opponent to roll the defensive dice over and over and over again.
Ah, I see.
You can be as efficient as you want with your limited possessions, but if the simulation is rolling 50 attacks for North Melbourne against 20 for Brisbane, efficiency cannot mathematically save you forever.
The sheer volume of attacks will eventually shatter the glass jaw.
It has to. It's a test of whether Brisbane's strategy of extreme efficiency can survive an absolute avalanche of negative data points.
Man, so Brisbane is really living on a razor's edge, but just below them, in 4th place, we have Adelaide. And Adelaide has this incredibly unique advantage built into their season. They're sitting in 4th, and they have a 2-point cushion simply because they're the only team in the entire simulation so far to register a draw.
Which is huge. Draws in this format are exceptionally rare, making this another massive statistical anomaly that just changes the entire landscape of the standings.
Because you get 2 premiership points for a draw, right? So they have this safety net. A win against Carlton, which the source frames as Adelaide's explosive offense against Carlton's defensive shell at the Adelaide Oval, a win could jump the Crows into the top two if results go their way.
What makes Adelaide's draw so fascinating is how it alters the psychological and mathematical pressure of the entire season.
How so?
Well, in a league where everyone is operating on increments of 4 points for a win and 0 for a loss, having a 2-point outlier completely misaligns you from the rest of the pack. It acts as an anchor in the standings.
So it's sort of like playing a board game, where everyone is forced to move exactly 4 spaces every turn, but you somehow manage to move 2 spaces on one of your turns. You will literally never land on the same square as your opponents again.
That is the perfect way to visualize it.
You completely bypass the standard tiebreaker.
Right. If Hawthorn, Port Adelaide, or Brisbane drop a game, they stay static at 24 points, and the pack catches them based on percentage. But if Adelaide drops a game, that 2-point cushion ensures they don't fall into those identical mathematical tiebreakers.
Oh, wow.
It protects them from percentage-based eliminations in tight logjams. And against a team like Carlton, who relies on a rigid defensive shell to stifle scoring, that safety net allows Adelaide's algorithm to take more aggressive, high-variance risks with their explosive offense.
Because they have a buffer.
Exactly. They can afford to roll the dice, literally and figuratively, because a loss just doesn't punish them as severely as it punishes the top 3.
Okay, so we've covered the precariousness of the top 4. We've got Port Adelaide's potential regression, Brisbane's glass jaw, Adelaide's bizarre 2-point safety net. But as the source points out, all of this instability at the top flows naturally down into a severe bottleneck in the middle of the ladder.
It really does.
We have a massive 20-point logjam.
And this logjam is where the structural integrity of the simulation is truly tested to its breaking point.
The pressure down here is immense. Geelong, Sydney, and North Melbourne are all locked together on exactly 20 points, which translates to 5 wins apiece. And lurking right behind them, just one single game back in 8th place with 16 points, is West Coast.
Yep.
The source highlights Sydney facing Richmond at the SCG, a classic rivalry with massive top 8 implications. And they use this phrase to describe round 9 that I find fascinating.
Peak variance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Peak variance. It is the defining concept for this exact moment in a simulated season, and frankly, in any statistical modeling of performance over time. I look at this 20-point logjam, and I keep going back to the Jenga tower metaphor from the source. It is exactly like you're playing Jenga. The tower is swaying, and you're being forced to pull the exact middle block out.
That's a great image.
Because of how tight this logjam is, one single loss for Geelong or Sydney or North Melbourne, and the whole finals bracket collapses for them. One slip-up, and you tumble out of the top 8 entirely. But why is round 9 specifically considered peak variance?
Well, to understand peak variance, we have to look at the intersection of sample size and stakes.
Okay.
In the early rounds of a simulation, say, rounds 1 through 3 variance is incredibly high. Anyone can beat anyone based on a lucky dice roll, but the stakes are very low.
Right, because if you lose a game to a bad dice roll in round 2, you have the entire season to mathematically recover.
Exactly. Conversely, in the final rounds of a season, the stakes are massive, but the variance is usually smoothed out. By round 20, the sample size is large enough that the true contenders have separated themselves from the pretenders. The true tactical profiles have asserted themselves.
But round 9 sits right in the middle of that graph.
Yes. Round 9 is the precise intersection where the stakes have become incredibly high, but the data hasn't fully smoothed itself out yet. The mathematical reality is still, fluid.
So the math is basically weaponized at this point in the season?
Yeah.
Every single dice roll carries exponential weight.
Peak variance means that the outcomes of these specific matches are going to swing the structural reality of the season more violently than at any other point.
Oh, man.
If Sydney loses to Richmond in that clash at the SCG, it's not just a dropped game in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Because they are trapped in that 20-point bottleneck, that single loss mathematically catapults West Coast up into their spot, drops Sydney into the wilderness outside the top 8, and alters the probability matrix for Geelong and North Melbourne.
Wow. So a single dice roll in Sydney changes the mathematical reality for a team playing hundreds of miles away in Geelong.
It is a total cascade effect.
The margins are so incredibly thin that you aren't just playing your opponent, you're playing the ripple effect of every other game in the round.
Exactly.
If you're listening to this right now, you might be wondering, why should I care about an AFL dice simulation on YouTube. I don't follow Australian rules football, and I don't play dice games.
Sure.
But this round 9 gauntlet is actually a flawless microcosm for life, for business, for anything where you are dealing with data and performance over a timeline.
Absolutely. The mechanics of this simulation map perfectly onto real-world systems, especially in how they expose hidden flaws.
Think about managing a massive corporate project, right? Or tracking quarterly sales, or even pursuing your own personal fitness goals. Early success can so often mirror what we discussed with Port Adelaide.
Yeah, it can be a total statistical fluke.
Right. You launch a new product, it sells out immediately in the first quarter, and you think you have built an invincible business model. But was the model invincible, or did you just get a favorable roll of the dice in a high-variance market?
And that is the hidden danger of the glass jaw scenario in the business world, too.
Yeah.
You might be highly efficient, running huge profit margins on a very small handful of dedicated clients.
And on paper, you think you're tied for first place.
Right. But your underlying percentage is negative because you lack the foundational volume to sustain long-term growth.
Right.
The moment the market shifts and brings pure volume against you, like when a competitor just floods the zone, your structural fragility is exposed.
The efficiency cannot save you from the avalanche.
It really can't.
So the real test isn't those early wins when the variance is high and the stakes are low. The real test is your structural integrity when the margins get razor thin, when the safety nets disappear, and when variance hits its absolute peak.
Exactly.
Do you have the foundation of a Hawthorn, built on sustainable metrics that can weather a few bad rolls? Or are you a fragile Jenga tower waiting for one bad quarter to bring the whole thing crashing down?
And I think what makes analyzing this through the lens of AFT Dice Season 13 so illuminating is that it removes the human bias from the equation entirely.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right. When a real sports team loses or a real business fails, we scramble to blame external factors. We blame the referee, the weather, a player's attitude, or a sudden shift in consumer mood.
Yeah, we always want a narrative.
But in a pure mathematical simulation, you cannot blame anything but the underlying structural integrity of your own strategy up against the cold, hard reality of mathematics. It strips away the excuses and forces you to look at the pure mechanics of success and failure.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. We started by comparing this scenario to a volatile stock market, a massive, complex system driven by human emotion and panic, yet heavily quantified by math and algorithmic trading. But if a purely mathematical dice simulation can generate this much chaos, this much pressure, and this much rich narrative drama hitting peak variance just like a real-world sports season, at what point does simulated randomness become indistinguishable from the unpredictability of actual human performance?
That is the million-dollar question.
Could analyzing the fragile Jenga towers of a dice game actually teach real-world coaches and CEOs about the unseen structural fragility in their own million-dollar organizations? Something to think about next time you look at a leaderboard, a quarterly earnings report, or stock chart.